COVID-19 has been a catalyst for ideas, for innovation.
Our employers have to be flexible.
How do we build wealth at the individual level, communities that did not have that previously?
Every city in the world will need to get more sustainable.
Innovators, entrepreneurs aren't just born, they're cultivated.
Building fair and inclusive economies is a complicated process, and we will need to be vigilant as we move forward.
Good morning. My name is Elisa Laurel, Program Manager with WRCOG. We are honored and excited you could join us for the 8th episode of our Future Forward series. I can't believe we're in December and we're on our 8th episode. So thank you for continuing to join us, and we're excited to have you on today's episode. So for any viewers that are new out there, we here at WRCOG serve as a regional agency that focuses on helping many of our cities and jurisdictions in the Western Riverside County subregion in the areas of transportation, planning, energy, environment, conservation, just to name a few. So now before we jump into our presentation, as usual, I want to thank our in-kind sponsors that continue to support our series. Huge shout out, thank you to the Inland Empire Regional Chamber of Commerce and the Southern California Association of Governments. Thank you guys so much for continuing to support. And just as a friendly reminder, if we will usually take questions at the very, very end of the presentation. So the way we do that is through the Slido app. You can go to slido.com, or you can go ahead and scan the QR code that appears in the corner of the screen with your phone. So you're going to take your phone, hold that up to the corner of the screen with the QR code, and go ahead and scan that. And then you're going to type in event code forward, FORWARD, and the number 8. Again, forward and the number 8. And then again, if your camera's not working or your phone's not working or you're not accessing it via your phone, go ahead and go up to your browser and type in slido.com. So additionally, just because this is a YouTube link, you have the luxury of going back and forth if you missed any content. And again, because this is a YouTube link, make sure that you subscribe down below and like our videos. Especially if this information is helpful to you, be sure to like. Additionally, as we are in the season of giving, please don't forget to donate to your local charities, foundations, food drives, and food banks. This year has especially been a difficult one, so if you're in a position to donate this holiday season, please consider doing so. We at WRCOG have actually partnered with the Feeding America for Riverside and San Bernardino to help provide donations in support of our community. And if you'd like to help us reach our goal, feel free to simply donate at the link that appears again in the corner of the screen, or simply text WRCOG, WRCOG to the number 71777. Again, WRCOG to 71777. And then a link again should be appearing below if you want to go to that app, or if you want to simply go ahead and type in to your cell, text WRCOG to 71777. Now, without further ado, today's broadcast focuses on tips and tricks for writing future grants. As we all know, grants are an essential resource for the future of many of our organizations, big and small. And today we are lucky enough to have Andrea Owen, who serves as the Vice President with Blaze & Associates, to walk us through some tips and tricks for writing future grants. She'll be addressing some elements such as where to start and where to look for grants, how to write a compelling proposal, and notable grants that are on the horizon. So with that, I'll be turning it over to Andrea Owen with Blaze & Associates. So let's go ahead and jump into her presentation. Andrea, turning it over to you.
Thank you, Elisa. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrea Owen with B&A Grant Consulting, and I am very pleased to be here today with WRCOG to share with you a few tips and tricks for future grants. But before we get started, I wanted to give you a brief overview of what we do here at B&A. We are a full-service grant consulting firm focusing on research, writing, and grant reporting. We currently work with over 45 clients in the local municipal realm in both California and a few other states. And our client sizes range from the city of Anaheim with over 350,000 residents to the small little city of Farmersville in the Central Valley with just under 11,000 residents. B&A has grant writing experience in all major grant areas, including public works, community development, parks and rec, public safety, economic development, and water, just to name a few. And we have a proven track record of success. We provide a return on investment of anywhere from $20 to $125 for every dollar in B&A grant writing costs. And since inception, we've actually written over 1,200 proposals worth over $2 billion in grant value. And our win rate hovers anywhere between 60% to 80% during any given year. We pride ourselves on our quality of work and our success, which is made possible by our tested process and procedures, as well as our logical go, no-go decision criteria. But more on that later. In today's presentation, I'd like to share with you a few grant program best practices that we've observed over the years, as well as how to go about finding grants at the federal, state, and local level. Then I'll talk about a few grants on the horizon that are either around the corner or that come around every year. And finally, I'll share a few tips and tricks for success to help you write the very best grant applications for future submission. So to start at the beginning, just what makes an organization successful with a grant program? Well, over the years, we have observed and identified 6 best practices that contribute to successful municipal grant program. First, leadership and staff must view grants as a success, not as a burden. We know staff is busy with the basic tasks of running a city, but if you as an organization embrace grants as another source of revenue in your culture, grants will become opportunities rather than burdens when looking to fund priority projects. Second, leadership must give staff the freedom and the authority to apply. So don't require staff to go to leadership for approval to apply for every single grant. It will just complicate and slow down the process, making it less likely that staff will want to pursue grants at all. For example, one of our clients requires its staff to take every grant quote to City Council before pursuing, and the time needed to just develop the staff report, wait the 2 weeks for the meeting, and then get the approval to pursue the grant dramatically reduces the time available to write a robust grant. And in most instances, doesn't allow for us to pursue the grant at all. Third, consider assigning a single point of contact to champion your grant writing efforts. This person does not need to be the grant writer, but they do need to be the point person and the cheerleader who will share the grant opportunities with different departments internally. This person becomes the grant linchpin in the organization, ensuring that the important grant opportunities are not missed. We work with quite a few cities that have adopted this approach, and they are usually very successful with their grant programs. Fourth, organizations should pre-position projects whenever possible. That means get to know future grants that might be able to fund your project. The more you understand what a grant wants to fund, the better you can tailor your project to the priorities of the grant. And if you get to know the grant program managers, even better, because they are more likely to take a second look at your application when it actually is submitted. But more about how to pre-position later. Fifth, be willing to move money around. So say you need to construct project X, but a grant is coming out to fund project Y, which you were going to budget on your CIP list. Well, instead, go after the grant funding for project Y and move the budgeted money to project X. So if project Y becomes grant funded, there you have it. Another example is, say, a city might ask us if we can find them money to build a new city hall. In fact, we have a lot of cities asking us to find the money for that. Well, no, we usually can't find money, but we might be able to help you find grant money to build that park or that stormwater project. So move that money that you had budgeted for those projects over to your city hall budget. That said, be really careful about supplanting funds. And that's why the pre-positioning activity that I just mentioned in the last grant, the last best practice, can help you move money during the budget season before it is set in stone. Lastly, don't be afraid to lose. Some grants are very complex or maybe competitive. Despite that, if you have a project that is a high priority for your organization, don't be afraid to apply, even if you think you might lose. Most grant opportunities are annual and will come around again. So applying to the grant for this round and losing will give you an opportunity to debrief with the granting agency, which will do 2 things. Number 1, the agency will remember you, and number 2, you will likely have some valuable input on how to make your grant better in the next round. So with these 6 tips in mind, how do you actually go about researching the grants you want? Well, there are essentially 4 different types of granting organizations. The first is the federal government, the second is the state of California, and next is the county and region, and then finally, you can look at foundations. So let's start at the federal level first. Federal government grants are by far the easiest to search for using the web portal, grants.gov. Upwards of 20 to 50 grants are posted per day on this portal, and our B&A research department reviews this portal daily. That said, federal grants have some of the more complicated federal rules and regulations that you must adhere to, and some of the most complex reporting requirements. So carefully review the grant before proceeding. Consider how much you can ask for and review the reporting requirements to see if the funding is worth the effort. For example, the National Endowment for the Arts grants are great, but they typically have low funding levels of $30,000 to $50,000, whereas the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Funding Program has no funding limit at all, so you could ask for a project upwards of $5 or $10 million. But remember, there are complex reporting requirements. So moving on to state grants. In the past, the state of California had no single mandated portal. And with over 500 departments in California, our B&A research department had to search every single agency and our department for open grants regularly. We have learned that some department websites are easier to search for grants than others. Some have allocation grants, while others offer competitive grants. Some you can sign up for listservs and some not. Some have contacts for each program and others just have a general phone number. But the good news is, just recently, this past July, California introduced a new portal called grants.ca.gov. Keep in mind, it is still in beta testing, and we have found that not all grants are listed yet, but we're hopeful it will become a more robust site very, very soon. So now, drilling down research even closer to home are the regional and county grants. Both the county and council of governments typically reach out directly to the cities they serve. So make sure your internal staff knows where to forward those emails that they may receive. Most counties have procurement sites, and the County of Riverside has one as well. We find this kind of particularly peculiar that you would put a grant on a procurement site, but that's how a lot of counties do this. Next, both the Southern California Air Quality Management District, the SCAQMD, and then the Southern California Association of Government, SCAG, they either post grants on their websites or they will communicate directly with cities. And then, of course, Western Riverside Council of Governments communicates regularly with its member agencies, as well as provides a grant table on their website, wrcog.us, which is updated twice monthly by B&A, and more on that later too. Finally, let's talk about another common place to look for grants, and that is foundations. Many foundations support health, wellness, and welfare programming, but typically by law, they cannot fund cities. So you would need to use your nonprofit organizations, say for example, the Friends of the Library, to leverage this type of funding. The key to success in foundation grants is to have executive level staff and board members make initial outreach and start relationship building before any project is put forth. Relationships are usually well established before funding is offered, and there is a foundation directory which we subscribe to, but we really only access it when clients specifically ask us to search out a particular funding source. There are thousands of foundations which support thousands of causes, and searching them out can be daunting and very time-consuming. So now that you know where to go to find grants, let's talk about a few grants on the horizon. We at B&A write hundreds of grants in any given year, but I'm going to share with you 8 grants that we tend to write the most. These grants span economic development, planning, public works, and parks and recreation. That said, I suspect many of you might be interested in hearing an update about the CARES Act funding first. So as many of you know, due to the COVID-19 pandemic this year, the federal government passed the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, otherwise known as the CARES Act. Most CARES Act dollars have already been allocated through various programs, including FEMA and the Economic Development Administration programs. Additional funding may be considered in the near future, but we still have to wait and see how the elections net out this year. All right, so there are 2 grants in the economic development arena I'd like to share with you. The first is the Economic Development Administration Public Works and Economic Adjustment Assistance Program. That's a mouthful. These applications are accepted on an ongoing basis, and this grant provides economically distressed communities with funding for public works and other projects or programs that help implement regional development strategies and advance bottom-up economic development goals. FEMA actually provided $1.5 billion in funding from the CARES Act last spring, but this funding is largely exhausted at this time. However, you can still apply for regular funding from the EDA program moving forward. And this grant strongly encourages applicants to consult with a regional EDA rep prior to applying. I wouldn't apply for it without doing that. The second grant is the Strategic Growth Council Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Grant Program. Applications are anticipated to be due in February or March of 2021. And this grant typically provides up to about $20 million in grants and/or loans to projects that achieve greenhouse gas reductions and benefit disadvantaged communities by increasing affordable housing, employment centers, and key destinations via low-carb transportation, for example, walking, biking, and transit. Please note, though, to be competitive, you must have an affordable housing development and several other partners already lined up and ready to go. The SCAG Sustainable Communities Program Planning grants are now out. The first of these grants will provide resources to several different types of projects, such as community or area-wide active transportation plans, quick build projects, and network visioning plans. The ATP application is actually due next week, December 11th. So if you haven't started yet, it's probably a little too late to apply. But there is a second SCAG grant open, which will actually fund affordable housing and sustainable development activities. And that application is actually due January 15th of 2021. Next, the Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant is one of my favorites, and this will fund local and regional multimodal transportation and land use planning projects that further regional transportation plans. It also needs to work with the state's greenhouse gas plan and assist in achieving Caltrans goals. This planning grant is great for ATP and Safe Routes to School plans, as well as other transportation-related planning efforts. The application is anticipated to open in December with a January due date, and this program also comes around every year. Another grant that straddles the planning and public works arena is the Caltrans Active Transportation Program grant. So this one's put out through the California Transportation Commission and Caltrans Active Transportation Program funding, which pays for pedestrian and bicycle planning or infrastructure improvements in largely disadvantaged areas. Cycle 5 closed in September of 2020, but the grant comes around every 2 years. So Cycle 6 is anticipated in 2022. Second, the Caltrans Highway Safety Improvement Program, also known as HSIP. This is also one of my favorites. This funds roadway improvements to reduce collisions and fatalities. Now, the program does require accident data and a minimum BCA for most of the countermeasures to be competitive. And this grant actually closed in early November, but it comes around every year in the fall. Finally, I wanted to share 2 current grants that fund parks and recreations projects. The first is the State Parks Per Capita Program, which provides an allocation of approximately $177,000 per city to fund acquisition or to create or rehabilitate existing infrastructure to address neighborhood park deficiencies. There is a 20% match unless you're a disadvantaged community. And please note, if you have not done so already, a resolution must be passed by December 31st of this year, even though applications can be received by as late as December 31st of 2021. So get those resolutions in if you haven't already done so. And if your city has communicated with the state parks earlier in 2020, you should have an allocation ready for you. Secondly, the statewide park development and community revitalization program is now open. This grant will fund up to $8.5 million for new, expanded, or renovated parks. and recreation opportunities in critically underserved communities. But to be competitive, think vacant lot in a very park poor, low-income community. The application deadline was recently extended from December 14th, 2020 to March 12th, 2021. And this will be the last round of funding. So if you need park funding, you really want to take a close look at this one. Now, there are dozens of other grants that I could talk about, but we just don't have time. So I'd like to point you to WRCOG's great grant resource for you to review at your convenience. On the wrcog.us website, you can always find a list of current grant opportunities. Just navigate to the programs page and then to the grant writing assistance page. And at the very bottom, you will see a link to current grant opportunities. Right now, there are over 50 open grant opportunities for consideration. This list is updated and posted twice a month for member city reference. Additionally, WRCOG provides grant writing assistance to member agencies with select grant programs that fall within WRCOG's mission. You can fill out a member agency interest form whenever desired. Both the WRCOG grant assistance and the comprehensive list of open grants are great resources for those of you without grant research and writing capabilities. All right, so moving on to tips and tricks for success. There are a few important considerations I want to make you aware of when looking at grant opportunities. First off, many grants are largely segmented by department type. For example, public works, parks and recs, water, etc. However, as I've indicated before, some grants can actually cross over departmental lines, like the EDA Public Works grant, for instance, which could either fund a plan or a stormwater project or a business incubator for that matter. Second, many California state grants give priority to disadvantaged communities, also known as DACs. These are often identified by median household income, free or reduced price meal programs at schools, or the state's Screen 3.0 mapping tool that uses a number of different socioeconomic and environmental indicators to calculate a comprehensive score for each census tract in the state. We use Screen a lot these days. Examples of grants giving priorities to DACs include the SCAG grants, the Active Transportation Program grant, and the Statewide Parks Program grant, to name a few. Third, some granting agencies provide copies of previously funded grants, which you really should take advantage of to see what the agency thinks a winning grant application looks like. And finally, as I've mentioned before, some grant program managers are willing to discuss your project idea, which is great. For example, the Bureau of Reclamation, which funds water projects, and the EDA Public Works grant programs are wonderful at listening and guiding. So if you have an opportunity to discuss your project idea with a program manager, please do so. It is one of the best tips we can give you, as you will see on this next slide. Pre-positioning your project prior to a grant call can be enormously helpful. Build that relationship. Remember what I just said, if you get to know the program managers, they are more likely to take a second look at your application. So participate in comment periods, attend workshops, build that library of funded proposals to help you replicate winning themes, and align your project idea with what the grant program wants to fund. These are a few of the many activities you can do prior to making your go, no-go decision when the grant solicitation is finally released. Other criteria to consider when making a go or no-go decision include, can the deadline be met? Can the local match be met? What is the historical win rate? Is it 5% or 50%? Is the grant win worth the cost to apply and manage? Is it $10,000 that you win, or is it $1 million? Can I pre-position? Has the agency funded a similar project in the past? And why my project? Do I have a niche story to tell? And then finally, how will my project score? Many grants assign points to criteria that you can score with your project campaign. And actually, the next final is, will I be successful if I get the grant? For example, do I have the resources to deliver the project on time and on budget? Once you make that go, no-go decision, then you need to get organized. First, start by reading the entire funding solicitation. I know it's long and can be boring, but you got to do it. Make a list of everything required. Download the required forms or templates, comply with interim steps like mandatory workshops or intent to apply letters, and assemble your team if you have one. On a practical note, I usually use a 3-ring binder, and I put my timeline and checklist up front. Then I create tabs with the guidelines, the grant mandated forms, and additional information such as cost estimates, schedules, scope of work, narratives, photographs, etc. Next, you will want to attack your long lead items. These include the budget, which, by the way, is really key to developing a narrative. You really want to identify how you spend your money up front. Otherwise, the project discussion can go on forever and ever, especially if you have programming grants. Then, grants often have a resolution and a staff report, plus letters of support, sometimes NEPA and CEQA environmental clearance, maps and photographs, and then sometimes registering with an online submission such as grants.gov. And lastly, anything that requires a third party, like a JPA, should be started up front. Next, almost every grant application has the following elements. The narrative. What is your great need and how do you propose solving it? The schedule. How long will it take? The budget. How much will it cost? A staffing plan. Who's in charge and are they qualified? You've also got visuals. Where is this project located? What does it look like, etc. And then forms and certifications. So you really have to have somebody in your organization who has the authority and the desire to sign these forms. So all of these elements create one proposal with one job, and that is communication. When you are communicating to reviewers, they may not know anything about your city or your region, so you have to paint a complete picture. The narrative needs to align with the budget, the schedule, the photos, the quotes, and any other documentation included. So let's review the tips on the narrative. First off, you should always use active voice and present tense. I sometimes find myself lapsing into the other and always have to make an effort to right the ship. So for example, do say replace 3,000 square feet of sidewalk, not replacement of 3,000 square feet of sidewalk. Say develop final design plans, not development of final design plans. And do say conduct environmental analysis, not conducting environmental analysis. Active verbs convey confident actions. So to help you ensure you use active voice, use the find and replace feature and look for the words like by, of, have, had, is, and ing. Use short sentences with easy English. Stay away from unusual words. Give the reviewer fewer, easier to read sentences. Use the words first, second, and third when describing process, tasks, or problems. Help the evaluator find the answers they are looking for. Remember, that evaluator is probably reading through dozens of applications. Their eyes may already be glazed over by the time they get to your application. Answer the question first and then add stories or background second. Why? Well, evaluators, when their eyes are glazed over, and even not, sometimes they skim and only read the first few sentences of each question. Which leads me to my next set of tips, how to use quotes and photos effectively to drill home your message. You can capture your reviewer's attention by incorporating effective quotes. If you can, make them stand out on their own, say in a box or a figure. Quotes can really humanize your problem. For example, say a city needs to build a walking and biking path. Here's a sample of what one resident might say. I live off XYZ road and there are no sidewalks. The road is also narrow and I don't feel safe biking on the road with my kids. Or a city needs to find money to clean up persistent illegal dumping. When the homeless pack up their belongings from this location, they leave behind lots of stuff, couches, clothing, rotting food, and other garbage. It's a mess and a health hazard. Your reviewer will more easily pick up on these quotes and get the problem if you have them. Separately, you can also use photos and graphics to capture their attention. First, make sure your photos are allowed. If the RFP is silent, then definitely include them. And you can be creative. If you can't include them in the body of a narrative, use them on a cover page or a table of contents if allowed. Or if they are a separate attachment, try to include a description of what the reviewer is looking at if you have that opportunity. You should also carefully tie your photos to your scope of work. In the first picture you see here, the city obviously needs to construct a sidewalk. In the second photo, the city needs to conduct some major cleanup activities in their local flood control channel. You can easily surmise this without one written word here. Truly, photos communicate 1,000 words, so let them reinforce your message. Budgets are also important to pay attention to when writing a grant. Make sure when you are developing your budget to use the prescribed format if required. A lot of agencies will provide a template, for example, like Caltrans with their planning grants and the Bureau of Reclamation with water grants. Use those templates and be specific. The agency wants to know what they are funding. For example, design and construction of a Class 1 bike lane with 75 trees, irrigation, and 2 benches plus ADA curbs. Make it specific. If the agency asks for a budget narrative, do not skimp. Repeat from the main narrative if needed, and also make sure your local match is calculated correctly if you have one. For example, one agency may require 25% of the requested amount, whereas another may require 25% of the full project cost. Sometimes this can be confusing, but always make sure to figure it out. Finally, do not request more than the maximum or less than the minimum allowed. Otherwise, your application could be disqualified. Whew, so that's a lot of tips so far. I just have a few more, and these are mostly common sense tips. At the end of this whole process that I have described, you are tired. You simply want it to be over with. But this is when you need to be the most alert because you might get sloppy and forget something. So you need to remember to do the following. First, you want to write your executive summary last. This allows you to capture all the pertinent details that you have developed in the process. Second, you want to check your narrative for spelling and page numbers. Here at B&A, we often print out our documents and red pen them. We have found you can find so much more when not reading on the computer. Third, ensure consistency of attachments to the body of the narrative. For example, make sure that attachment 1 is truly what you are referencing in attachment 1. Fourth, reread the entire NOFA again before submitting. I know, that's probably the last thing you want to do, but do it. Fifth, ask a trusted associate or someone who does not know your project to read your writing for clarity. And finally, do not wait until the last week to register for online submissions. For example, grants.gov can sometimes take up to weeks to register. Now, once you submit your grant, then you can rest and wait for either an award or a denial. If you receive a denial on your application, don't despair. Always request a debriefing. You may or may not be granted one, but always ask. A debrief can take several forms, such as a telephone call, a written email, or a formal letter with scores. And sometimes a denial can actually turn into an award. So for example, several years ago, we applied on behalf of a city to the California Natural Resources Agency Urban Greening Program, and the city was denied. At the debrief call that we set up, the agency had about 3 people on the call, and the city also had about 3 staff members on the call. And it became a very collaborative discussion on how we could help the city make the project better for the next round of funding. Well, within 1 week of that call, apparently another awardee fell out, and the agency called the city to offer them funding. So we've learned even a denial can turn into an award. And alternatively, if you are lucky enough to win an award right out of the gate, here's what you need to do. Implement that grant agreement exactly as required. That means your grant reports are on time and in the format prescribed by the granting agency, because successful management and reporting of this grant, being on schedule, on budget, no red flags, is going to provide you with a better chance of winning more grant opportunities with that funding agency in the future. It's a win-win proposition for everyone involved. So ladies and gentlemen, this concludes my grant tips and tricks presentation, which I hope has been helpful to you. If you have any questions that aren't answered in our upcoming Q&A session, I welcome you to review our website at blazeassociates.com or contact me directly via my email address noted here. And Elisa, with that, I'm turning the floor back over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. That was a really, really great presentation, and we appreciate you joining us today on the Future Forward broadcast. Again, our 8th episode. And I do want to head this off real quick. I know we were having some buffering issues in the beginning, but hopefully that's been fixed right now. We also have some fires raging out here in California, in addition to a pandemic. So, you know, what else? Hashtag 2020, right? So thank you again, Andrea, for joining us. We have some questions in the queue that I want to go ahead and address for our audience members. So one of the questions that we have is, you know, if additional CARES Act funding comes through due to COVID-19, how can organizations best position themselves for this? And what have been some of the best practices learned from the first stream of funding?
Well, good question. We're not sure if additional CARES Act funding will come down, but it may well come down in the next couple of months. And likely the government will funnel the CARES Act funding through the existing programs again. One of the programs it funneled it through was the FEMA program. And if you were to position for that funding, I would say keep every single receipt that you have for preparing your city or your organization for responding to the pandemic. Any technology you had to purchase for your staff to work remotely should be, you know, could be reimbursed. Of course, PPEs, hand sanitizer, things like that. Any additional measures you've had to take as in response to the pandemic could be eligible for reimbursement. That would be with FEMA. If money comes through again with the EDA Public Works, then what that does is it allows you to use the pandemic as the economic injury to the special need for justification of having to do a particular public works project or a business incubator or something to help generate new jobs or keep jobs in your area.
Okay.
Shovel ready, so to speak, is always a great way to position yourself.
Great. So jobs in the area, and as we all know, COVID-19 has definitely impacted our economy and obviously the jobs in the area. So one of the questions that did come up is how can an organization position itself for grants, especially with retraining the workforce due to COVID-19?
Well, that's a tough question to answer because it depends on the grant. And most of the grants that come around normally aren't necessarily looking to fund new jobs, yet, you know, say public works projects through Highway Safety Improvement Program will get people working. You know, parks development will, you know, get people working. So I would say if you've got projects in your queue, look for those that will obviously need to be your high priority for your area, but that perhaps can help to employ the most people possible. Again, every grant is different, so there's no one answer that can, you know, suffice for all of those grants.
So let's say an organization, I think probably trying to work together too is one of the things that we should look towards. How can organizations position themselves to better work together? Like, let's say, working together with your community college systems and things of that nature. How can we position to do that?
Right. Well, I would say start reaching out and having those brainstorming conversations. You know, if you have a local college nearby, give them a call and talk about possible projects. Definitely get the programming and the project initiation started now. And then if you've got the gem of an idea or, you know, the starting of an idea, then if a grant comes out, you can more, you know, carefully refine that idea to the grant. Now, the caveat with that is not all grants give you enough time to refine your project. So I would definitely say partnerships are great. And, you know, the more partners you have, the more ideas are generated and the better the project ultimately that is needed for the area can be.
Okay, great advice. So I just also want to double check, is there anything that maybe we may have missed in the presentation that you wanted to address as far as, you know, things that you have seen that have been best practices from other organizations? So let's go back to, let's say, the CARES Act funding. Have you seen any organizations, in a sense, really respond well or write a grant really, really well? What are some of those best practices that you've seen from another organization?
Well, I would say being alert to when the grant comes out, and typically our agency is the one who would be sending the grant to our clients, and really just being on top of the internal happenings of your organization, keeping track again of those expenses that have been specifically pandemic related. Best practices are, as I mentioned in the presentation, that you have one person in your organization who sort of has an eye on grants and who gets those grants out to the other departments within a city or an organization and said, hey, what about this? This could fund this. So it's really just having somebody who is that linchpin to the grants that are available at that time.
Okay, great. I also know that during your presentation, you had mentioned, sometimes there might be some challenges with going after a grant because it's like, we may not have enough time.
Right.
Is it even worth it? How do you convince your leadership, or how do you convince your organization, let's say, to just, it never hurts to try,
Well, and that's
how do we do that?
It's going to be on a case-by-case basis. So, as I mentioned, there's about 7 or 8 things that we look at on a go, no go decision. And to convince your leadership, it really has to be, I think, a priority project, a project that is something that is relatively well defined. And if you're going to go after a grant, but you're not necessarily going to win it, you want to make sure that that grant is an annual grant. That would be one of the go no goes. I wouldn't necessarily say go after a grant if there's not another round, if you don't think you have a slam dunk, because our goal is we never want to spend our clients' money unless we think it's going to get them more money, because our client success is our success. And so that's why we really try to counsel our clients and their leadership with ways that can, get them the best success possible.
Great. So I know we have tips and tricks of what to do. Do you have any suggestions of what not to do? Like the big, do not do this.
Do not delay. And don't go on vacation without telling the person who's writing the grant that you're going on
no, it sounds like that you speak from personal experience.
And don't delay. And do read that NOFA. Do really pay attention to what the grant wants to fund. We have had some organizations that insist on going after a certain type of funding, even though we have counseled them that it's not likely they're going to get funded, and they don't get funded. So, listen, pay attention, listen, be on top of things. Don't delay. A lot of times what happens is, as human nature is, we will delay till the last minute to get something done. But if you can really, really, make sure you have a schedule, and back into that schedule, giving yourself enough time for program development, project development, enough time for others in your organization to review your grant, you're going to have a better chance of submitting a robust and competitive project.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to close out the questions a little bit early because it looks like we've addressed a majority of them already. So I do want to leave you with, is there anything that you want to share with our audience last minute of, again, either just a best practice or best advice, anything at all, closing out statement from you?
I would say planning. Planning is really your best advocate. Keep on top of the grants when they come out, pay attention to them, and talk to others in your organization if you don't have a grant consultant, and talk about, just really review the requirements, because the more you know up front, the better your project is going to be at the end.
Right, absolutely. Great advice. So thank you so much, Andrea, for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it. If you don't mind, we're going to go ahead and also send the presentation to our audience members, the PowerPoint presentation. So thank you to all those that registered. We'll be sending that out to you guys, and you'll be getting that. So I do want to close the presentation out and our episode out. Again, thanking Andrea for joining us today with some of that great information on tips and tricks for writing for future grants. We are going to be taking a break in January, and we're going to be doing another episode in February. So we're going to be starting a bi-monthly schedule for our Future Forward series. I do want to thank our audience members so much for joining us. We also always want to hear what topics you want to hear about. So also, I do want to let you know that when we start our bi-monthly episodes, we're going to be still using slido.com. So please be sure to access it when you can. And I, again, want to close out with thanking everyone for coming. Please don't forget to donate to your local food drives and food banks and donations as well, especially during this holiday season. So with that, I want to go ahead and end the episode early. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you so much, Andrea, for joining us as well.
Thank you.